disclaimer, I'm not going to be talking about any of the like human missions. I'll briefly mention them, but I will not be talking about them in particular. Those are human missions, not primarily unmanned crewed spacecraft. Anyways, June 20th, 1944, in Nazi Germany. How's the rocket? Good. Even though the Nazis were being severely kicked in the ass in Europe, they were still destined to be superior over the Allies. So, they developed the V-2. And the V-2 successfully made it to space, even though barely passing the Kármán line, which is the barrier between Earth and space. That's pretty far up, by the way. Anyways, after the defeat of the Nazis in 1945, the U.S. and the Soviet Union, let's just say, kidnapped a lot of Nazi scientists for their own personal gains. And the U.S. and the Soviet Union developed their own V-2 rockets. In 1946, America launched their own V-2 rocket, and it took the first ever picture from space. 1948, the U.S. launched their own rocket, Bumper 1. And now the U.S. and the Soviet Union were developing their own rockets. The U.S. developing the Viking, Jupiter, and Vanguard. The Soviets developing the R-1, which is technically a missile, but like, I'm too lazy to go back and fix it, and I'm already recording, so whatever. The 50s, after a few more rocket launches, everything changed with the launch of Sputnik on October 4th, 1957. Sputnik. This is Sputnik. Sputnik was a circular satellite with the mechanical shit in the orb, with 4 antennas sticking out. Sputnik orbited the Earth every 90 minutes, and its radio could be heard, or signal could be heard, by even the most amateur of radio transmitters. So that's cool. In November 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik 2 with the first ever animal in space, Laika. What a massive upgrade, bro. Severely upgraded. Anyway, the U.S. was in panic. Citizens were scared that the Soviet Union was going to be technologically more advanced than them and eventually come over and take over America, because, Cold War and stuff. So on December 6, 1957, the U.S. launched Vanguard TV-3. But it exploded. And so the tiny little satellite was catapulted away from the launch site and landed near a beach, where it was found like this, and American pride was absolutely shattered. And of course, the Soviets, this was the biggest joke of the entire year. They called it names like Flopnik, Oopsnik, Kaputnik, or my personal favorite, Stayputnik. Even though the Soviets were laughing their ass off at America for failing, this would not be for long, because on January 31st, 1958, the Jupiter Sea launched Explorer 1, America's first ever satellite, thus beginning the space age. Sputnik had actually crashed back down, not really crashed, but disintegrated into Earth's atmosphere just a couple weeks before Explorer 1's launch. In March 1958, Vanguard 1 was launched, and of course in the Soviet Union, this was a laughingstock. As Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev described it as the grapefruit satellite, because it was so small, you could hold it in one hand. Anyways, Vanguard 1 was, of course, let's just say a little bit of downgrade from its predecessors. Its counterpart, Sputnik 3, was launched in May 1958. Explorer 1 also ceased transmissions in 1958. Leaving Vanguard 1 as the only operating American satellite in orbit. In August 1958, Pioneer 0 was attempted to be launched. It failed, and thus beginning the chapter of Pioneer. So Pioneer 0 failed, Pioneer 1 failed, Pioneer 2 failed. These were all the first launches by NASA, so trying to make yourself look good? Then good job. And they tried with Pioneer 3, but they changed up the design, making it look more like an umbrella, like an ice cream cone. Failed. In 1959, the Soviets launched Luna 1, which is the first attempt to go to the moon, and potentially impact it. And it missed, and it went into an heliocentric orbit, which it still remains today. Vanguard update! In February 1959, Vanguard 2 was launched, the first ever weather satellite. Vanguard 2 took an image of Earth, but due to the quality being so damn poor, they couldn't really publish it, it was just so bad. Pioneer. On March 4th, 1959, Pioneer 4 launched, and it was successful, having successfully flew by the moon. The Reds at the moon, speaking of which, Luna 2 was launched, and it successfully impacted the moon, completing the mission of the failed Luna 1. In the Vanguard update, Vanguard 3 was launched, and thus it concludes the Vanguard chapter, which was very short-lived. In October of 1959, Luna 3 was launched, and it took the very first ever pictures of the moon, showing the far side of it, actually. 1960, and Pioneer 5 was launched. Of course, it's a lot different than its predecessors. It's not an ice cream cone. It's not like a little polygonal thingamabob. It's this. It looks kind of cool. And thus it ends the original Pioneer run. Tyros 1 was launched, and so was the communication satellite Echo 1. Korabel's Sputnik 1, or just Sputnik 4, was also launched, and it crashed back down in 1962. In November 1960, Mercury Redstone 1 was launched, even though it failed. We're not going to talk about Mercury Redstone stuff. 1961, Venera 1, which is the first ever mission to Venus, is launched, and thus begins our chapter of Venera, and made a flyby. Yeah. Ranger 1 is launched and makes to go to the moon and impact the moon. It fails. Ranger 2 fails. 1962, Ranger 3 is launched. I think you can guess what happens. It failed. Ranger 4 was launched, and it's the first one to successfully impact the moon. Now the British are getting involved, and they launched their own satellite, Ariel 1. Telstar is also launched, and we can begin Mariner. Mariner 1 and 2 failed. September 1962, Canada gets involved and launched Alouette. Ranger 5 fails. And then 1963, Syncom, 2 communication satellites are launched. 1964, we got Ranger 6 and Ranger 7, both impacting the moon. Ariel 2 is also launched, and NASA decides, hey, let's go to Mars. So they launched Mariner 3. It gets to space, but communication fails. Mariner 4 successfully is the first one to ever make it to the Martian planet. Showing these images, showing that Mars is not a terraformed life form like Marvin the Martian or any other War of the Worlds cartoons could show it to you as to be. It's actually dry and it's wasteful. Italy gets involved and launches San Marco. Vanguard 1 also ceases transmission for the final time in 1964. 1965, Ranger 8 and 9 are launched, and both impact the moon. Ranger 9 actually being streamed live. Intelsat's also launched. France gets involved with their launch, Asterix. Isn't that such a cool name for a satellite, Asterix? Alouette 2 was also launched. Back to Pioneer. Despite the Pioneer program being canceled, Pioneer 6 was launched. In 1966, the Soviet Union launches Luna 9, being the first ever to land on the surface. Even though despite its small size, it still cannot be found. And so let's focusing on the moon. The NASA launches Surveyor 1 and successfully lands on the surface, as well as sending lunar orbiter to take pictures of the moon. Pioneer 7 is also launched, joining Pioneer 6 in an orbit around the sun. Surveyor 2 is also launched, and it fails. It crashed into the moon. And lunar orbiter 1 disintegrated crashed into the moon, actually, and then disintegrated. Lunar orbiter 2 was sent out. 1967, Surveyor 3 was launched, and this would be the first one to be visited by humans. The only one, actually, as no other human has ever visited another probe after that. Surveyor 4, 5, and 6 are launched, and Surveyor 3 also shows us the first ever image from the moon. Australia gets involved by watching RURSAT. Pioneer 8 is also launched. 1968, Surveyor 7 is launched, and that concludes the Surveyor program. Pioneer 9 is launched. 1969, you can technically count the lunar modules as spacecraft because they are carried and have to be, they're just spacecraft, man. I don't know how to explain it. Mariner 6 and 7 launch, and they successfully go to Mars. West Germany launches Azure. 1970, Japan gets involved and launches Osumi. Venera 7 is also launched, and it lands on Venus. I think. I don't have a script. Luna 16 is launched in preparation for Luna 17. We focus on this little guy up here. Lunacod 1, the first ever rover on a different surface other than Earth. Lunacod 1 sees contact in 1971. China gets involved, launching Dongfeng Hong 1. Sounds like a slur. I don't care. In 1971, Mariner 9 is launched, or Mariner 8, technically. It fails. Speaking of Mars, the Soviets launched Mars 2 and Mars 3. Mariner 9 is also launched, and it reaches Mars, narrowly beating the Soviet Mars 2 and 3 probes. And speaking of Mars, the Mars landers are part of the Mars program of the Soviet Union. They feature 2 white vehicles, have 4 pedals on the side, featuring a Prop M rover. In December 1971, Mars 2 is the first one to detach, and Mars 2 crashes, and everything's destroyed. Mars 3 successfully parachutes to the surface. However, due to a huge dust storm taking place at the time, this is the only image it was able to send before losing contact. 1972, another Venera, and it goes to Venus and successfully lands Venera 8. Her Pioneer on March 3rd, 1972, Pioneer 10 successfully launches, being the first mission to ever be going to Jupiter. Pioneer 10, of course, is a massive upgrade from its predecessor like Pioneer 6, Pioneer 5, and 4. Pioneer 10 being unique, having a plaque on the side. It features a pulsar showing the solar system's location, 2 human figures to show anatomy of a human body, the trajectory of Pioneer, and the silhouette of Pioneer. Pioneer 10 officially now on its trek to Jupiter. Mariner 9 also ends its mission in 1972. 1973. Hey, we haven't been to Mercury, and also America wants to go to Venus. So they send Mariner 10 and they successfully performed its flyby. Pioneer 10 is slowly trekking closer, but it's about to be joined by its sister, Pioneer 11. Back on the moon, Lunokhod 2 is launched and lands on the moon and ceases contact just a few months later. Back on Mars, the Soviets are continuing to send more probes. Mars 4 fails. Mars 5 gets into orbit, but it doesn't last long. Mars 6 also fails. And Mars 7, the lander detached early and it missed. Skylab is also launched. Pioneer 10 update. In December 1973, Pioneer 10 successfully flies by Jupiter, taking the first ever images of the planet up close. All being at the 70s, they are kind of grainy. Now, Pioneer 10 is sent on trajectory out of the solar system a bit upwards. 1974, Helios is launched, studying the sun. How cool. And the Luna 23 is also launched. Pioneer 11 update. Pioneer 11 makes a flyby of Jupiter. Unlike Pioneer 10's trajectory, it actually is curved a bit because it's on a trajectory to Saturn. 1975. France launches multiple satellites like Castor Pollux, Aura, and Starlet. Well, I don't even know what the hell that is. India launches Aryabhata. On August 20th, 1975, the launch of Viking 1. Now, Viking 1, both of them actually, are consisted of 2 parts. The Viking Orbiter and the Viking Lander, which is in that little capsule right there. December 9th, 1975, Viking 2 was launched, and they're now both on the trajectory to Mars. Venera is also launched, with Venera 9 taking the first ever images of the surface of Venus. Actually, 2 of them were launched, Venera 10, 9, and 10, showing what life was like underneath this desolate, barren, acid-filled planet. 1976, Helios 2 is launched, and the ESA also forms and launches their first ever satellite, CTS. The Netherlands also gets involved in that and launches the Astronomical Netherlands Satellite. The Orbiting Solar Observatory is also launched. Here's a Viking update. The Viking probes have reached Mars, and they take this famous image of Mars as you know it today, showing the barren, dry wasteland it actually is. The Viking lander successfully touched down, Viking 1 landing first, and Viking 2 landing second. Both landed around right. Viking 1 was right there. Viking 2 was somewhere there. Anyway, the Viking 1 landers transmit through the orbiters, which continue to orbit the Mars. Luna 24 also lands. Yeah, 1977. Pioneer 11 is slowly inching its way towards Saturn. Pioneer 10 is still on its trek out of the solar system when new probe, Voyager, joins them. Now, unlike Pioneer, Voyager will have more trajectories than Pioneer did. Voyager program is more focused on not only just Jupiter and Saturn, but also hopefully going out to Uranus and Neptune. And unlike Pioneer having just a simple plaque, Voyagers have a golden record, which, if found, can be played and displayed sounds of Earth, images of Earth, and other stuff. The Voyagers officially take off and are on their journey to the outer solar system. 1978, Pioneer. America still wants to go to Venus, so they launched Pioneer 12 and Pioneer 13, which leads to multi-probes, and then, vaporizes in the atmosphere. Venera is also launched, and Venera 13, 14, or 11 and 12, I can't remember. The Ultraviolet Explorer is also launched, and Czechoslovakia launches their own Magion 1. 1979, Skylab disintegrates into the atmosphere. Voyager update. Voyager 1, having overtaken Voyager 2 despite being launched later than Voyager 2, reaches Jupiter. Voyager 2 reaches Jupiter later that year. Pioneer 11 update. Pioneer 11, because at this point, Voyager 1 and 2 were on their way to Saturn. And Voyager 2's journey would have to take it from Saturn to Uranus and Neptune. So people, specifically scientists, thought it would be valuable to learn about Saturn's ring condition through Pioneer. So Pioneer 11 has officially reached Saturn on September 1st, 1979. And it was deemed safe for Voyager 2 to go along to the ice giants. Pioneer 11 was then shot upwards. 1980. The Solar Maximum mission is launched, and here's a Voyager 1 update. Voyager 1 reaches Saturn, taking these beautiful, stunning images of the planet. And also a very, very close flyby of Titan. Voyager 2 is then literally launched upwards of the solar eclipse plate. Unlike Pioneer 11, which is more a bit slightly upwards, but not as much. Mars update. The Viking 2 lander fails. Viking orbiter also fails, concluding Viking 2's mission. 1981, Venera update. Look at this. Got cool Venera photos. And we're still interested in Venus, Bulgaria launches their own Intercosmos 22. And also the launch of the space shuttle. And yeah, that's go successful. Here's a Voyager 2 update. Voyager 2 reaches Saturn. And it's slingshotted away from Saturn past Titan. It didn't really do a flyby of Titan like Voyager 1 did. And instead of just, unlike Voyager 1, which is just slingshot up, Voyager 2 was kind of curved to the side on its trek to Uranus. 1982. Nothing really major happened in 1982 regarding like spacecraft and stuff. But there were some space shuttle launches. And also Viking 1 and its mission. 1983. Hey. Let's go to Mars. Let's go to Venus again. That's what I meant. So they launched whatever this is, dude. This is just a Venus mission, man. I don't even know. Exosats launched in 1984. After the end of the Venera program, the Soviets launched Vega, which concludes a lander and also a comet Halley, which was approaching rapidly at that point. 1985, Sakigate and Susei are launched to study Halley's comet, and so is Gieto. I don't know how to pronounce that. Halley's comet is still rapidly approaching. 1986, here's a Voyager 2 update. Voyager 2 is at Uranus, and it takes photos of its cool moons, and it departs on its way to Neptune. Now, originally I mentioned Halley's comet. Spartan Halley was supposed to study it. However, its carrier vehicle was exploded, and so TRSB. Mir was also launched, so that's cool. 1987, Ginga is launched. 1988, Israel launches their own satellite, Ophek 1. The Soviets are still focused on Mars, but not on Mars itself now, but it's on its moon, so they launched Phobos 1 and 2 to study Mars's moon Phobos. Phobos 1 fails, but Phobos 2 actually manages to survive, transmitting, barely though. Eventually, both Phobos probes had landers and their like piercing probe. This was the only last image taken by Phobos 2 before it went offline. 1989, May 4th, 1989 saw the launch of Magellan, the first ever interplanetary probe in 11 years, the last one being Pioneer 13. Magellan will be heading to Venus on a mission to map everything underneath the surface, which the Venera probes and the Pioneers couldn't do. Officially beginning Magellan, so it was launched on its way to Venus. Here's a Voyager 2 update. Voyager 2 reaches Neptune, and it takes these pictures showing and discovers a great dark spot. Voyager 2 is then slingshotted downwards, passing by Triton, and this is the last image ever taken by Voyager 2, the departing image of Neptune. On October 18th, 1989, the space shuttle STS-34, or Atlantis, launches with Galileo, a probe that will be heading to Jupiter. Now, Galileo, like Magellan, was stored away after the Challenger disaster, but scientists mended it up a bit and then decided it was launched. Hopefully, it will successfully enter orbit around Jupiter, is what they wished. So it joins Magellan in the inner solar system on its trek to Jupiter, thus beginning the Galileo chapter. 1990, Voyager 1 update. Voyager 1 had crossed the orbit of Neptune. It had been 10 years since its Saturn flyby, and it takes this image of the Earth. Earth appears as a small little pale dot in the vastness and void of space. As wise and inspiring astronomer Carl Sagan states, "Look at that dot. That's home. That's us." It shows how lonely we truly are in this universe, how insignificant we truly are, yet we thrive on. In April 1990, Hubble is launched. Hubble is the first ever telescope that's in space and takes these cool photos, and actually a lot of photos that you know of today. That's pretty cool. Back on Magellan update, Magellan officially enters orbit around Venus. And Magellan is not alone, as Magellan joins Pioneer 12, which is still in orbit. And Magellan starts mapping what's underneath Venus' surface, or what's under the clouds of Venus. In October 1990, the Ulysses probe is launched and on trajectory to Jupiter. And unlike Magellan and Galileo, Ulysses is literally just going straight for it. There's no stopping, it's just going. And hopefully, once it reaches Jupiter, it will be plunged into an orbit around the sun, which will end at the orbit of Mars, and then make another flyby of Jupiter. Hitton is also launched to the moon. 1991, April 5th, 1991, space shuttle launches with the Compton Gamma Ray Observatory. A observatory similar to Hubble, but not quite. As the name suggests, besides gamma rays, Hubble is more of just an astronomy space telescope. Magellan update. Magellan is still in orbit around Venus and continues to finish up the mapping that it is yet to fully complete, because, mapping a planet is really hard. Magellan and Pioneer 12 still have the same objective. You also have Yoko, Japan's solar satellite, which, Galileo update. By this time, Galileo is far enough away from the sun to unfold the low-gain antenna, which is that yellow thing right there. However, when they opened it, it didn't open fully like it shows in the picture. It opened like this. It opened like a half-open umbrella, and thus making the probe kind of look weird, showing it's the full metal beneath it that was the low-gain antenna was supposed to cover. It's like a few of the ribs that failed to deploy, and it was like stuck on the spacecraft. So scientists thought it was the sun's rays that were causing, the ribs to kind of like fail. So what they tried to do was turn the spacecraft back and forth away from the sun in hopes that the ribs will fully deploy. However, it did not fully deploy, and scientists were just disappointed that they had to go with like this. October 1991, Galileo flies by Gaspra and observes it from afar. The Soviet Union also collapses, so yeah, no competition with the Soviets anymore. 1992, Ulysses update. Ulysses successfully reaches Jupiter and enters its orbit to study the sun. Pioneer update. At Venus, Pioneer 12, which is ill-fated, officially plunges into the atmosphere and disintegrates, now leaving only Magellan as the only probe orbiting Venus. We haven't really talked about Earth satellites, so Geotail is launched at the moon, and hopefully somewhere at the moon. Geotail makes some flybys. At Mars, it has been about 16 years since the last Mars mission at Viking 2's last contact. So NASA launches the Mars Observer. We'll get back on that later. Galileo makes its Earth flyby, officially sending it on a trajectory to its target, Jupiter. 1993, let's go back on Mars. The Mars Observer is rapidly approaching Mars, starting to take its own images, as well as this colored image and a flyby full of Jupiter. On August 21st, 1993, 3 days before the Mars Observer was supposed to enter orbit, contact was lost. Now, it's unknown if the Mars Observer fulfills its command automatically and entered orbit around Mars, or it was sent on a heliocentric orbit. Anyways, let's take a moment of silence for the Mars Observer. Anyways, Galileo. Galileo makes another asteroid flyby of Ida and discovers a moon known as Dactyl. There's also some other interplanetary probes and shit. Remember this one, Cosmos 2251 is launched. Remember this satellite. It may seem insignificant, but it will be important later, trust me. 1994, the next moon mission, Clementine, is launched. And it shows new photos of the moon since it has been a few decades, actually, since the moon missions. In May 1994, Clementine departs from the moon. In July 1994, Hubble observes Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9. And Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 was a comet that broke up into several fragments and plunged and crashed into Jupiter. Hubble was not the only one that observed this crash. Galileo, which was about 100 million miles away, also observed it. However, it only showed the little flash that the comet created as it impacted Jupiter. The Turkish also launched Turksat. Magellan mission end. Earlier the year, Magellan was put in a circular orbit around the planet. In October 1994, Magellan took its final plunge, activated its thrusters, and began its plunge into Venus's atmosphere. Despite Venus being a harsh environment, Magellan, some of it was thought to have survived and crashed onto the surface where it slowly became part of the atmosphere. Magellan was one of NASA's most successful interplanetary missions, and it will never be forgotten. 1995. The ISO is launched, and so is SOHO, which is a sun mission, which joins Ulysses. Cosmos 2251 also ceases operations. Remember this satellite. Clementine also ceases contact in May 1995. Galileo update. Galileo, which is 50 million miles away from Jupiter now, unleashes the Galileo probe, as you can see here. Now both are heading towards Jupiter. Pioneer 11 update. Pioneer 11, which had just barely crossed upon the orbit of Neptune, sends its final transmission and becomes a derelict interstellar futurely object. Galileo, on December 7th, 1995. Galileo officially enters orbit around Jupiter, passing by Europa and Io, and the Galileo probe enters the atmosphere. This telemetering or transmitting data to Galileo before it was eventually crushed by the intense pressure that Jupiter has. Galileo activates its thrusters and safely enters orbit around Jupiter. 1996, on February 17th, 1996, Near Shoemaker was launched. Near Shoemaker's main mission is to go to the asteroid Eros. We haven't really talked about Earth satellites in a while, so Polar is launched. Galileo actually makes a huge discovery at Jupiter's largest moon, Ganymede. Ganymede, despite being a moon, has a magnetic field. It is the only moon that actually has this. Mars, it has been about 4 years since the Mars observer's loss. So, on November 7th, 1996, a new satellite was launched, the Mars Global Surveyor. The Russians, of course, not wanting to lose to the Americans, launched Mars 96, a satellite that has a lander, not to be confused with the Mars Soviet landers. It failed, lol. In December 1996, NASA launched not only a lander, but also it had a component rover, which we'll get more into later. In the year 1997, Iridium 33 is launched. Remember this satellite. It will be important later. Near update. In June 1997, Near Shoemaker flies by Mathilde. Pathfinder. On July 4th, 1997, Mars Pathfinder successfully touches down in Arius Vallis on Mars. In day 2, Sojourner rover is successfully deployed. Sojourner. And it roved around completing the mission objectives. Now, Sojourner, unlike the future rovers, only can drive a certain amount of miles away from the lander until contact will be lost between them. On September 11th, 1997, the Mars Global Surveyor successfully reaches Mars and enters an orbit around it. On September 27th, 1997, Mars Pathfinder went silent, leaving the semi-autonomous Sojourner rover just left alone, unable to contact Earth. Sojourner's last objective was to stay stationary till October 5th, 1997, and then drive around the lander. It was unknown if Sojourner was able to do this, as its last contact was October 7th, 1997. However, future Mars imaging shows that Sojourner was a lot closer than when they last detected it. So it's possible Sojourner was fulfilling the drive around the lander, and then its battery died out. October 15th, 1997 saw the launch of a new spacecraft, Cassini. Unlike Galileo or the other interplanetary missions, this one was not heading to Jupiter, it was heading to Saturn. Thus, we can begin the Cassini-Huygens chapter. Galileo. Now, Galileo enters its new mission called GEM, Galileo Europa mission, studying primarily Europa, Io, and Callisto. In 1998, North Korea launches their own Hwang-Myung-song-1. There was no evidence that actually supports that this satellite reached orbit, despite North Korean claims. The Nozomi is also launched, but it fails. The Mars Climate Orbiter is launched to join the Mars Global Surveyor at Mars. And Deep Space One is also launched. So is Lunar Prospector. Cassini-Huygens update. Cassini makes a flyby of Venus and also takes some photographs of it. The ISS also starts to be built. 1999, in January 1999, the Mars Polar Lander is launched to go to the South Pole of Mars and investigate, the ice and stuff. Piggybacking on the mother spacecraft, or Deep Space Two. Can you see the resemblance? Guys? Can you see the resemblance? February 7th, 1999, a new spacecraft, Stardust, is launched. A front component being a capsule, which will eventually sample the comet Wild 2. Cassini-Huygens update. Cassini makes its second flyby of Venus and its first flyby of Earth, setting it on trajectory to Jupiter. Near. Near Shoemaker attempts to orbit Eros, however, it fails until Near has to keep moving on. Chandra is also launched. The Lunar Prospector crashes into the moon. Mars update. The Mars Climate Orbiter reaches Mars. However, it went too low into the atmosphere and ended up burning up. The Mars Polar Lander successfully reached Mars and was beginning its descent. However, upon when it's expected to land, no contact was received. 2 weeks later, when the Mars Global Surveyor was tasked with imaging the landing area of the Mars Polar Lander, it did find this, and astronomers were certain that the Mars Polar Lander survived the impact and was still there. I just failed to contact. XMM Newton was also launched, meaning that we can end the year 1999 and the 1990s in the end of the year 2000. Cassini update, by the way. Cassini made a flyby of the asteroid Masurki. However, due to being so far away, only images that came back from Masurki were a dot. Cassini was also still on its way to Jupiter. Near Shoemaker update. Near Shoemaker successfully enters orbits around Eros. Stardust update. Stardust opens the capsule for, routine testing and shit. But yeah, it's still on its way to Vilt 2, and it closes in May 2000. Cluster 2 is launched, by the way, and the Compton Gamma Ray Observatory, despite still being operational, falls back down to Earth. Pioneer update. 35 years ago, Pioneer 6 was launched, and NASA, to celebrate this, attempted to contact Pioneer 6, which they surprisingly successfully managed to do for 2 hours. This was the last contact ever made with Pioneer 6. Cassini update. To top off the year 2000, Cassini made its flyby of Jupiter. Originally, Cassini was not supposed to make telemetry data of Jupiter. However, due to the Galileo probe still being in orbit around Jupiter, Cassini did studies with both Galileo. The first time NASA was able to study 2 planets at once at the same time. Galileo began its Galileo Millennium mission, which would be its final phase. 2001, Near Shoemaker's mission end. Near Shoemaker, being in orbit for almost a year, finishes the orbit and slowly descends down to Eros, not being designed as a lander. However, it successfully lands and transmits data for about 2 more weeks before going silent due to the cold temperatures on Eros. Mars update. The Mars Odyssey is launched. And originally, Mars Odyssey was supposed to be part of a program called Mars Surveyor. It kind of like trying to step up from Mars 98, which ended in, disaster. The Mars Surveyor program was going to have Mars Odyssey as the satellite with a lander and a rover. However, the lander and rover were scrapped, and only Mars Odyssey was launched. In August 2001, Genesis was launched. And unlike Stardust, Genesis was going to extract samples from the sun. And the Mars Odyssey reaches Mars, joining the Mars Global Surveyor. Mir also falls back down to Earth. Deep Space One mission end. Deep Space One reaches its target, Brawley, and since then has been just cruising on its own orbit. Deep Space One sent its last transmission, and although the rest of the spacecraft was deactivated, the radio transmission was still active just in case the Deep Space One needed to be used in the future. However, a contact attempt in March 2002, Deep Space One did not respond. 2002, a comet was approaching, and so Contour was launched. It failed. You got all other spacecraft too were launched. Stardust update. Stardust passed by Anne Frank, which was not its target, but still made observations of it. 2003, Pioneer 10 mission end. Pioneer 10 has been floating around for over 30 years. It was transmitted its weak signal, its mission had ending in 1997. However, the DSN still tracked its very weak signal. Pioneer 10 sent its last transmission in January 2003, marking the end of Pioneer 10 and the end of the Pioneer chapter. Genesis update. Genesis is continuing to extract samples from the sun, preparing for its return to Earth in a few years. Or actually next year. Mars. On June 2nd, 2003, the Mars Express was launched. 8 days later, NASA launches Spirit and Opportunity, 2 twin rovers, and now they're all on their way to Mars. Spitzer Space Telescope is also launched. Galileo, mission end. Galileo has been in orbit for 7.5 years. And finally, just like its probe, descended into Jupiter's atmosphere. The only reason why this was happened is because to protect its own discoveries, like life on Europa, they did not want to risk contamination of Europa and kill off its life if it does have any. So they sent Galileo into Jupiter's atmosphere. And just like the probe, Galileo officially vaporized and was crushed in Jupiter's atmosphere. Stardust update. Stardust is rapidly approaching Vilt 2 and the capsule opens again. Mars Express arrives at Mars on Christmas Day 2003. The Beagle 2, which was attached to the top of the satellite, is launched, and it enters Martian atmosphere and lands successfully. However, no contact was established with Mars Express afterwards, and Beagle 2 was declared a failure. 2004, Stardust. Stardust officially reached the closest approach of Vilt 2 and extracts the samples that come from the coma of the comet. And the capsule is closed after 6 hours. Stardust is now on its way back to Earth. Mars. Spirit lands on January 3rd, 2004. Opportunity also lands on January 25th, 2004. Both rovers now operating. However, just shortly after, they lose contact with Spirit. And scientists believe that a malfunction and error, communication error, caused this. However, contact was later reestablished with Spirit. March 2004, Rosetta was launched on a mission to Comet 67P, because God forbid I'm going to try pronouncing that name of the actual comet. Cassini update. Cassini has slowly been inching its way towards Saturn. On June 30th, 2004, Cassini officially enters orbit around Saturn and will begin serving Saturn, and mainly its moon Titan. Genesis arrived back to Earth and deploys the probe containing its sun samples. However, the parachute of the probe failed to deploy and ended up crashing onto the Utah range where it lands. Though most of the probe was destroyed and so were the samples, some of them survived and had to be carefully separated out from the debris. In August 2004, Messenger was launched to a mission to Mercury, the first time ever since Mariner 10. Cassini update. Cassini has been performing flybys of Titan, mapping its surface, and doing other stuff. On the Christmas Day 2004, Cassini deploys Huygens, a Titan probe. Now both were on their way to Titan. Cassini will be broadcasting 2 Huygens to collect data, which will eventually be sent to Earth. To top off the year 2004, literally last day, Cassini makes a flyby of Saturn's farthest major moon, Aeptus, observing it up close, which Giovanni Cassini had observed back in 1610. 2005, January 12th, 2005, Deep Impact is launched. Deep Impact can pace up the main bus and an impactor, which are heading to Comet Tempel 1. Cassini-Huygens update. Huygens has rapidly been approaching Titan. On January 14th, 2005, Huygens began its break into Titan, plunging through the atmosphere and successfully landing on the surface, sending back this image showing Titan is bare, just filled with rocks, although oceans do exist. So Cassini transmits to Titan and collects data from Huygens before eventually turning back to Earth and beginning to broadcast that data. While we're on the topic of Cassini flies by Enceladus just a month later after Huygens and discovers that Enceladus is not as hot as they thought or as cold. In fact, Enceladus has plumes coming out of the bottom. And this is a major discovery at Saturn. Rosetta makes its flyby of Earth. Deep Impact update. Deep Impact reaches Comet Temple 1 and deploys the impactor. The impact was streamed live by literally everyone. This was not the only, Deep Impact was not the only one who saw it too. Hubble, Chandra, XMM Newton, and Spitzer also witnessed this. Messenger makes its flyby of Earth. Mars, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter is launched, which will join its sister spacecrafts, Mars Express, Mars Odyssey, and the Mars Global Surveyor. Speaking of Mars, on the topic of rovers, Opportunity approaches an interesting rock, which later turns out to be a meteoroid, and Spirit witnesses dust devils. Cassini, we can drop Huygens. Cassini has been making more flybys and discoveries at the moons, because, since Titan's, the primary Huygens Titan mission is over, it's been imaging the moons like Dione, Rhea, Mimas, Thales, and Hyperion. Genesis mission end. Following the catastrophic failure of the probe, Genesis spacecraft had no use anymore, so it was disactivated, and it was left in a heliocentric orbit where it remains today. 2006, Stardust. Stardust reaches Earth and deploys the capsule. Stardust and races with the capsule. Stardust was not made to re-enter Earth's atmosphere. Instead, it just flew by the landing site of the capsule, and the capsule successfully landed, unlike Genesis. And the samples were successfully retrieved. January 19th, 2006, New Horizons is launched to Pluto, which was still classified as a planet for 7 more months. New Horizons, unlike its other interstellar friends, Voyager and Pioneer, did not have a message, unlike the latter. However, it did kind of carry the ashes of Pluto's discoverer, Clyde Tombaugh, Mars. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter reaches Mars, joining, like I said, Mars Express, Mars Global Surveyor, and the Mars Odyssey. Spirit. Spirit has reached a very important point known as home plate, because it looks like a baseball home plate. Opportunity. Opportunity has reached Victoria Crater, and it can be seen by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. Venus. The Venus Express is launched, which is the first mission to Venus since Magellan plunged in 1994. Cassini. Cassini has been mapping Titan and discovers methane lakes on Titan. And so Titan is now more primary target, as well as Enceladus too. And so Sun. And Cassini took this opportunity of Saturn eclipsing the sun to take this beautiful image and discovers 2 new rings. As you can see, they're very faint. Messenger makes a flyby of Venus on its way to Mercury. This will not be the only one. Mars Global Surveyor's mission end. The Mars Global Surveyor, which has been in orbit for about 10 years at this point, met its end because of communication failure. The Mars Global Surveyor actually went silent on November 2nd, and it was indicated 5 days later that it went into safe mode when it was awaiting commands. The Mars Global Surveyor is expected to remain in orbit around Mars till 2047, where it will eventually crash into the surface. 2007 Rosetta update. Rosetta makes its flyby of Mars. New Horizons update. New Horizons makes a flyby of Jupiter, because every spacecraft kind of needs that, on its way to Pluto. Stardust plus Deep Impact update. Both Stardust and Deep Impact on the very same day were announced that will have extended missions. Two different comets. Stardust, being renamed to Stardust Next, or just Next, will explore actually what Deep Impact caused at Comet Temple 1. Deep Impact now being known as Epoxy. going to the comet Hartley 2. Mars update. Mars Phoenix is launched, which will complete the objectives of the failed Mars polar lander. However, it mimics it. Phoenix will be in the north, the Mars polar lander was in the south. In September, Dawn is launched, which will go to the asteroid Vesta and also dwarf planet Ceres. China also sent Chang'e 1. Rosetta makes a flyby of Earth. However, scientists just thought it was an asteroid and it had the potential of impacting Earth. However, astronomers realized this follows the same path as Rosetta, so they quickly changed their mistake. Cassini update. Cassini has still been studying moons and discovers plasma at Dione and Thetis. These moons really have interesting discoveries, huh? 2008, Messenger makes its first flyby of Mercury. Even though Messenger's primary mission is to enter orbit around Mercury, it does not do so and continues to carry on. Mars. Phoenix lands and begins its primary objectives. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter having imaged Phoenix in its descent. Opportunity. The Opportunity has been in Victoria Crater for a while and begins leaving Victoria Crater on its way to Endeavour Crater. Rosetta. Rosetta makes a flyby of an asteroid. Cynic? Whatever. Messenger makes another flyby of Mercury. And the Indians launch Chandrayaan-1. And it has an impactor like Deep Impact. Ulysses Mission N. Having been launched in 1990, Ulysses was officially retired after 18 years. Phoenix Mission End. Phoenix, having been on the surface of Mars for 6 months, lost contact, most likely due to the cold temperatures of, the north of Mars. Polar also ceases operations. Cassini update. Cassini is now in its new mission, and the Saturn Equinox mission, because Saturn is about to reach its equinox, or it's just the summer months. 2009, remember those two satellites I told you to remember? Well, they collided. That's why I want you to remember that. This was the first major satellite collision. The other times it was just like a satellite and a piece of space debris, but this is between two full satellites. No space debris, just full satellites. This would eventually lead to a lot of new rules being placed after space debris to be relocated to a graveyard orbit. Dawn. Dawn makes its flyby of Mars. And also Chang'e 1 impacts the moon. Kepler is also launched. Spirit update. On May 1st, 2009, Spirit becomes webbed in Martian soil. And NASA begins trying to free the poor rover. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter is also launched with L-Cross, which will eventually impact the moon, which it successfully does in October 2009. Rosetta update. Rosetta makes its final flyby of Earth on its way to Comet 67P. Chandrayaan-1 also ends its mission. 2001, Akatsuki is launched to Venus. However, it fails to orbit Venus, but it will eventually soon. Spirit update. Spirit loses contact. It stops transmitting. Now, Spirit has always been the weaker one, the wonky one of the two. Although Opportunity also had her same mission problems, Spirit always was a bit of a failure. Cassini update. Cassini is still on its Equinox mission. It takes an image of Pallene, a very small moon. Also, Planck is launched. Epoxy update. Epoxy makes its flyby of Hartley 2. And so it images that. Opportunity. Opportunity approaches a unusual rock, kind of like a heat shield, and inspects it. This rock is now called Block Island. Opportunity is still on its way to Endeavour. 2011, Stardust Next update. In February 2011, Stardust makes its flyby of Temple 1. And it shows the actual effects of Deep Impact. And it shows that the impactor did indeed create a crater from slamming into the surface of Temple 1 at very fast speeds. Messenger update. Messenger successfully enters orbit around Mercury, being the first spacecraft to ever do so. Stardust mission end. Stardust, it's been over a month since Stardust made its flyby at Temple 1. And because it had little to no fuel left, it performed the final burnt depletion. Speaking of which, of mission endings, Spirit mission end. Spirit, after over a year of no contact, NASA officially gave up and declared Spirit dead. Spirit lasting 8 years. Dawn officially enters orbit around Vesta. The space shuttle also ends following the completion of the ISS. Juno is officially launched to Jupiter to fulfill the Galileo's legacy. Mars update. Opportunity has been chilling in the Endeavour crater for a bit while. The only operating rover on Mars, but that wouldn't be for long because in November, the Mars Science Laboratory was launched, which would launch a SUV-sized rover to Mars. Curiosity. Grail is also launched. Grail A being launched on December 31st, 2011. Grail B being launched on January 1st, 2012. Both enter lunar orbit shortly after. Cassini update. Cassini discovers a weird polar vortex on Titan. No moon has actually been able to has ever been known to do that because Titan has an atmosphere. Curiosity successfully lands in August 2012, and like I said, now the previous rovers like Pathfinder, the Mars exploration rovers did not just use like a sky crane. They were not just fully open. They used airbags, but Curiosity, being freaking massive, did not, because it was too heavy. Dawn officially departs orbit from Vesta on its way to dwarf planet Ceres. A Voyager 1 update. Voyager 1 officially leaves the heliosphere, which is the end of the sun's influence. December 2012, the Grail mission officially impacts the Sally K. Ride site. 2013, Juno makes its flyby of Earth. Maven is launching. Epoxy makes its end. Deep Impact, or just Epoxy, was actually still operating, was heading onto a new comet to study when contact was suddenly lost. Opportunity is still chilling in Endeavour crater. And Curiosity celebrates 1 year on the Martian surface and sings the down, 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 down. Cassini, on its last billowing breath of the mission, takes this stunning photo, again like backlit Saturn in 2006, this stunning photo of Saturn, this including Earth, called The Day the Earth Smiled. NASA told people that this image was happening and told everyone to wave at Saturn to celebrate humanity's accomplishments in the territories of space exploration. 2014, Rosetta officially reaches Comet 67P. Maven also reaches Mars, and so do the Indians. Rosetta carried a lander known as Philae. Philae officially departed from Rosetta and landed that very same day. Or did it? It did, just not the way they wanted it to. Opportunity reaches a new point, and it discovers this jelly donut rock. Speaking of Opportunity, as an old rover, starts showing problems. Like its flash memory almost got fucking erased. 2015, Dawn officially reaches orbit around Ceres. Opportunity's mission and flash drive is restored and all the problems are resolved. However, Opportunity is still very old and showing problems. Like, for example, its arm had stopped moving in 2008. Messenger mission end. Messenger, having spent 4 years around Mercury, impacted the surface. New Horizons officially reaches Pluto, being the first planet to do so, showing up-close images of Pluto. showing the beauty of this new, now dwarf planet. Cassini, as its mission came to a close, performed a plume dive of Enceladus, just to see what all those plumes were about. Akatsuki also reaches orbit around Venus. 2016, Juno reaches orbit around Jupiter. Rosetta also meets its mission end at Comet 67P, slowly lands on the comet. Rosetta also spotted Philae lying in a ditch on its side. Mars update. The Trace Gas Orbiter was launched by the ESA with the Schiaparelli EDM lander. Schiaparelli was supposed to test landing conditions for the future ESA Mars rover. It crashed. And despite this, the ESA declared Schiaparelli successful because it showed what they needed to improve on their landing. Opportunity, which was in the same area as where Schiaparelli was going to land, attempted to image Schiaparelli as it was landing. It did not. So Opportunity kept on with its main mission in Endeavour Crater. OSIRIS-REx was also launched. A mission similar to Stardust, except Stardust sampled a comet. OSIRIS-REx was going to sample an asteroid. 2017, Juno was still at its Jupiter mission, studying its moons and Jupiter itself. Cassini mission end. Cassini, having spent 13 years around Saturn, was running low on fuel. There have been multiple talks about what should happen to Cassini at the end of its mission. One being aerobraking out of Saturn into Uranus orbit, but that would take too long. Other was taking it into Titan orbit, which was a good idea, but they decided not. The same reason for Galileo. The only reason why this is happening is to prevent contamination of Titan and Enceladus, which are pro-contenders for life. So on April 22nd, 2017, Cassini performed its goodbye kiss, its final flyby of Titan, and put it in an orbit where it would go outwards and then between Saturn's main body and the rings. Cassini lived a long life. On September 15th, 2017. Cassini plunged into Saturn's atmosphere, vaporizing. Cassini was NASA's most successful outer interplanetary mission, and its legacy will carry on forever. OSIRIS-REx. OSIRIS-REx makes its flyby of Earth. 2018, Bepi Colombo's launched to Mercury since 3 years ago. Messenger plunged. InSight's also launched, and Kepler says goodnight. Dawn officially ends its mission and remains in orbit around Ceres. Opportunity. To celebrate 5,000 days on Mars, Opportunity turns her camera arm towards herself and takes this selfie, because the planners had not seen Opportunity in 14 years. However, aging would be the least of Opportunity's troubles, as in June 2018, a huge dust storm engulfed the planet. Opportunity went into safe mode to protect its energy. The Parker Solar Probe was launched on a mission to, quote-unquote, touch the sun. InSight also lands. OSIRIS-REx eventually enters orbit around Bennu. 2019, New Horizons makes its flyby of Arakoth. And China launches Chang'e 4 with U-22. Opportunity mission end. Opportunity, the dust storm had concluded in August 2018, and NASA attempted to contact Opportunity tons and tons of times, but it failed. The last thing NASA sent to Opportunity was "I'll Be Seeing You" by Billie Holiday. And now the only rover left is Curiosity, which sent a heartfelt tribute on Twitter to Opportunity. The Israelis launched Beret, and it crashes. 2020, Spitzer says goodnight. Mars, a lot of countries are going to Mars, including the UAE, China, and NASA's Mars 2020 program. The Solar Orbiter is launched. OSIRIS-REx successfully samples the surface of Bennu and leaves Bennu on the way back to Earth to deliver the sample. 2021, Mars, Perseverance lands and deploys Ingenuity. Zhurong also lands, which is the China's rover. Lucy is launched, and so is DART. The James Webb is also launched and takes these beautiful photos. 2022, Capstone is launched from the moon. DART impacts Didymos, and Artemis 1 is launched for a future crewed mission on Artemis 2. It deploys a lot of shit, including no snowable Biosentinel. Artemis 1 returns in December 2022. 2023, Euclid is launched, and so is Psyche and Jupiter IC Moon Explorer, just juice. Lucy makes a flyby of Dinkinish, and Osiris Rex delivers its sample. 2024, Ingenuity's mission ends. Era is launched to the Didymos and Dimorphos again. Europa Clipper is launched on a mission to Europa to study Europa's conditions to see if life can exist. The Parker Solar Probe makes a flyby of Venus, and makes perihelion around the sun. 2025, the Lunar Trailblazer and Spirit X are launched. Spirit X being like a little telescope. Europa Clipper makes a flyby of Mars, and Lucy makes a flyby of Donna Johansen. But the question is, why? Why should we learn about this? Because space is cool. Space is interesting. You can be part of it, and maybe one day you can be an astronomer.